hazard strikes anytime, anywhere. Don't be caught off guard, make sure you prepare. Hurricane, earthquake, a tsunami, fire and flood threaten your safety. Danger approaching, pay attention to the warnings and advisories. Your essential items packed and ready, so you won't be scrambling in an emergency. Prepare and be aware.
This message is brought to you by the Department of Emergency Management.
Welcome to another edition of Real Talk in the Face of Danger, a podcast by the Department of Emergency Management. I am your host today, Marcus Myers, and today we will be discussing mass crowd events and why planning for them is so important. And joining us today, we have Deputy Director of the Department of Emergency Management. This is Captain Robert Harewood, as well as Mr. Marlon Small, who is the Divisional Officer of the Barbados Fire Service. Gentlemen, how are you doing this morning?
I'm fine.
Well, let's get straight into it. Okay, so I'm going to start with you, Captain Harewood. There's somebody who just saw this show on YouTube, right? They clicked it, and I want you to say why they should listen for the whole thing and what can be coming up in this conversation that is so important to them.
Okay, so this morning we want to talk about what a mass crowd event is. Why is it so important for the organizers of events to put emergency procedures and plans in place at mass crowd events? And then, of course, the discussion will probably go into who is involved in mass crowd events and why those agencies that are involved need to be involved in mass crowd events.
And one thing that we don't think about as consumers, and I'm a consumer as well when I go to these events, etc., I don't think about the invisible agencies that make this thing possible, you know? So let's get straight into it. What is a mass crowd event?
So in Barbados, a mass crowd event is determined as an event with 1,000 people or more within a particular space. Now, there are events that may have 1,000 people or more that may not be classified as a mass crowd event in the general terms. So a mass crowd event in Barbados is defined as an event which attracts a large number of spectators or participants, 1,000 or more, which requires contingencies and additional planning for mitigation and preparedness to eliminate or minimize the potential impacts to patrons and the community. Because any emergency at a mass crowd event, you can imagine, may cause either a mass casualty situation or multiple casualty situation, and one would want to have agencies in situ that if something should go awry, you had immediate response there and then.
And when you say agencies, we may not be aware of how many agencies you may be speaking about. So can you just give us an overview of how many agencies would be responsible for this mass crowd planning?
Oh, great. So let me a step back first. So there's a committee called the Mass Crowd Planning Committee, which is chaired by the Barbados Police Service. And that committee sits the Barbados Defense Force, Ministry of Health, Emergency Ambulance Service, Department of Emergency Management, who is secretary to that committee. We have, for example, Ministry of Tourism sits on that committee, and a number of others, including volunteers like the Roving Response Team, Red Cross, etc. That committee is pulled together to review requests for mass crowd events, for major events. And what they will do is, using a vulnerability assessment, determine the level of and type of the level of event, which will determine then what type of resources, the footprint that one would want to have, the medical emergency footprint that one would want to have at the particular event. So, for example, we look at where the event is being held. We look at the types of hazards that could impact on the event. If you're in a flood-prone area, the time of year, if it could be impacted by severe weather. The hazards that you might find within the event itself. For example, Farley Hill, we always look at the building and monitor that building. That is not normally backdrop for the stage.
And when I think of hill, I think in terrain as well, and the decline, etc., those things.
Yes. So the number of things that are looked at within the vulnerability assessment, and a score is determined. You look at the capacity to respond, the distance from the nearest facility, medical facility, etc. And you come up with a score, and the score is either up to 1 to 3. And a level 1 event is an event where I want to say you pull out all your resources, or the majority of them. So you would have a significant footprint from the Barbados Police Service, Barbados Fire Service, Ministry of Health, Medical Emergency Ambulance Service on standby. normally try not to use emergency ambulance service at these events because they have responsibility for national response. So we ask vendors to communicate with one of the private entities out there that provide ambulance services. We use Barbados Red Cross, and some of the events, like the national events, would have, for example, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Health team, that they will manage all medical and everything that deals with medical. So that's generally the footprint at the mascot event.
That's an interesting description. And when I think of Department of Emergency Management, it may make one wonder, how can this emergency response or this emergency planning be different from other emergencies that we may think about when we first think about emergencies? So how is it different?
Well, the difference is that there's nothing happening in that this is your prepositioning resources in the event that something happens. So there's the venue operations center that stood up, and this is the command center for the event, where the police again provides the coordination, and the agencies, head the agencies that are at the location, sit there for command and control. And this is in planning for any eventuality that could take place at the event. So there's nothing happening. So if something does happen, that venue operations center turns into an instant command center because there's no an incident. And then they have to treat them to the whatever incident is that is taking place at the event. So you preposition resources, you do all your checks, continue to do checks throughout the event, your hazard mitigation checks, fire checks from fire service will go and they will continue to check the vendors for fire extinguishers and compliance, etc. And Mr. Small will speak to this, if the use of pyrotechnics, for example, they will continue to check and make sure the pyrotechnics being set up are safe and those types of things. That when the event unfolds and these particular aspects of the event unfold, and if things should go awry, there is a response ready and waiting to treat to it.
Yes, so let's really get into that some more, Mr. Small, and the role that the fire service plays. So just now Captain Harewood would have mentioned a few things, but can you really get into the nuts and bolts of what the fire service does in the plan?
Okay, one of the first things that I would like to mention is that there's always a site visit before the actual event, and the fire service is one of those agencies that would help assess the site. In this particular case, we're looking at vulnerability in terms of fire. We also look at possible evacuation, and if it's a enclosed facility, we'll ensure that the exits and the extinguishers and all these things are up to compliance. So that pre-site visit is very important, so we have an idea not only of what the venue is presented to us, but also we have the opportunity based on what we are seeing in terms of hazards to assess our own internal capability to provide coverage for that event. In terms of the actual day of the event, as Captain Harewood mentioned, having that venue operating center, there's a representative from the Barbados Fire Service there, and we normally arrive ahead of game time or the start time for the show, and we will conduct our pre-fire inspections. So we are checking where the nearest hydrants are, we are checking the exits and make sure that no persons have those exits blocked. We are checking the extinguishers in the facility. So we are doing a complete site evaluation, and most of these events will have vendors. So we also have to pay attention to the vendors because we know at intermission, this is one of the points within the shows or the events that persons can actually have a situation developing. So we want to ensure those temporary commercial facilities. I say temporary because some vendors, it's tables or tent, these kind of things. We want to make sure that they have at least 2 ways to exit the temporary facility. We also want to make sure that they have the extinguisher, ensure that they can use the extinguisher effectively. And one of the things that have factored in, we've been seeing lately, is that on all sides of these temporary commercial facilities, we are seeing that we're having crowds around all 3 sides. And that poses a problem because sometimes it's on the side they are doing the open flame works, and therefore the officers at that incident have to be constantly vigilant to ensure that there are no problems with safety at the event.
It appears as though that is one of the main or most common challenges that you would say that you face at the fire service, which would be persons not really understanding, they have to keep away from the open flame, etc. They may not think about that. Is that one of them?
Yes, that's so basically persons come to these shows to enjoy themselves, see the persons that are performing.
I have to raise my hand that sometimes I do that and I may not think about these things, right? So I'm also asking for me.
So in addition to that, we also look at even the stage to ensure that the stage is safe, ensure that they have the adequate firefighting equipment. So it is a complete pre-event inspection. And once that inspection meets the standard, then we communicate that information to the venue or operating center so that they know from the fire service perspective that it's a go. And if there are any shortcomings, we also report that and try to have those things rectified before the all clear to start the show goes up.
Okay, well, and just so I understand, you would have also mentioned fireworks. And I know many persons look forward to fireworks as usually one of the big parts of the event, and some events are judged based on their fireworks. But I guess sometimes we don't really always think about the cautions that happen with fireworks and doing them correctly. Fireworks is definitely something that the fire service looks out for and using them properly, etc.
Yes, so generally the fireworks, there's a request to come into the fire service. And we will also send out an inspector along with the company that will be launching those fireworks. And they will look at the vicinity. They're going to look for exposures. And they're going to make a risk assessment and determine if it's safe and if we need to put additional resources in that area. So fireworks, yes, it changes the whole risk at the event, but that also is inspected and to ensure that it's safe for all persons. And when they speak to safety and the fire service, it's not only for the public, but also the responders there at the venue.
Right. Okay. So I know that both of you know that the agencies will have a certain amount of resources that can be used. How do you ensure, Captain Harewood, that the right amount of resources are allocated swiftly and effectively for these events?
So as indicated, when we do that vulnerability assessment or analysis, a level 1 event, once we've determined that it's a level 1 event, there's a particular footprint, number of persons that need to be there, minimum number. Now the police would normally determine that given their own security threat, but then there's a minimum number for the fire service. For example, they may have 2 appliances with 10 officers, 25 officers, and maybe two senior officers. Then for that type of event, we ask for two ambulances with 4 EMTs. It may be 2 doctors and 4 nurses, etc., under the Ministry of Health umbrella. Then we'd have our utility vehicle there. We would have a number of volunteers using VHF radios with the first aid teams on the ground and their room, the event, etc., to give early warning to the VOC. So there's a standard footprint or number of persons or entities, emergency response agencies, for each level of event.
So an example of a level 1, can you give, like, for example, like, is that?
Crop
over is, okay. Grand Kaduma is a level 1.
Is a level 1.
Okay, and I would say that's the highest.
Level 1. And most of those events are level 1 events. But if you go back to the past, like we had the 50th anniversary celebrations, we had the Rihanna Loud concert, cricket, also level 1 event. We would have had a number of events in the past that were, the majority of events that we get involved in are level 1 events. If the event is a level 2 event, DM would respond to the organizer of the event just to indicate what they needed to put in place. They need to make sure that police was informed. This is related for loud music, traffic control, but obviously for the alcohol license, etc. Fire need to be involved too to come and check the fire extinguisher. So they may not necessarily stay at the event, but they will pass through to make sure that things are in place, to make sure all the fire extinguishers are charged, etc. Of course, then we will ask that you engage a private medical association to at least have 1 ambulance with 2 EMTs, etc. So the levels change depending on the type. But with all events, we would create what we call a fact sheet an operational sheet that will go out to all the agencies so that agencies know that this event is taking place, that if something were to happen, then the quicker response from the municipal agencies, the service, etc., because they're aware that something is happening, that there's an event going on.
And we were speaking off camera before, and we were saying how persons may think of a type of event, for example, an event on the hill that's an annual, but the level of how would you say it would be the level of emergency?
The threat level.
The threat level may vary, although it's the same event people go to all the time, but based on different variables that may change the next year as opposed to the year before. I guess that's one thing that we will have to make clear. And of course, these smaller variables would change depending on the year, which would change the severity of what could happen.
Correct. So one example of that, and I want to say this cautiously, is the structure at Fire Hill, which, the constant reverberation of the music and stuff on the structure. Every time there's an event there, that structure has to be relooked at. And so some of the things that the agencies look for is any widening of cracks and anything that might cause the structure to collapse during an event. Because if that were to happen, then you could have either stampede and this and that or whatever. So there's a lot of things that have to go into the preparation of the event spaces to ensure that if something should go wrong, for example, there's a fence around the structure that ensure that person don't go too close to the structure, go into the structure.
Okay. Mr. Small, looking at past events, how history can teach us, can you think of one time that things did not go according to plan, and what may have resulted in that? What could have caused that when that happened?
Well, there are always events. Sometimes these safety issues might not present themselves as a result of a hazard analysis from the fire service, but it could be stampeding or encroaching of a crowd, which created a hazard, secondary hazard, which might involve a fire because persons might be running and therefore knock over open flame and create a problem. A lot of times this will pose a challenge for the fire service, and that is why having that venue operating center there is very critical, because you must appreciate that such an event, you can have persons injured. We will still have to mitigate the fire situation. We need some level of crowd control. So it's easy then for us to mobilize those resources because they're right there on the scene. And remember, we want to provide the first aid, the first response as quick as possible, intervention to ensure that people's lives, the life hazard is reduced. So that is very critical. And so there would have been events. No one want to name any specific events, but just to understand the facts surrounding the event. Now, in terms of fire, a normal fire is progressive, it's slow. But in terms of an explosion, that produces a different scenario where the threat to life will be much greater, and therefore the response and the needs will change. So I bring it all back to that venue operating center and having that level of control and those agencies in place.
So the venue operating center, if there are more resources needed, I guess from a fire station, etc., how does that communication work?
Well, basically, there's a representative from all of the agencies in the venue operating center, and communication from each agency comes back to their representative there, and there is a commander, as Captain Harewood has said, the police, and we will summon all the various resources from our various agencies to help in the mitigation of the incident.
So what are the main things for any event promoters or event planners you would want them to take away from this regarding fire specifically and looking out for those kind of hazards? What should they do?
Okay, one of the first things that I would say to any event promoter is that to have a relationship with the various agencies that are going to be providing that coverage for the event. So we want those event promoters and the other stakeholders to pay heed to the advice that is given from the fire service, ensure that those recommendations that will come up from those site visits are carried out so that it's a smooth transition. Remember that we are talking at least 7 days before the event. We're having those site visits, and obviously some recommendations going to be put forward. And remember that it's not only looking at the site, but it's also looking at the resources the particular agency have. So we don't want a situation where we have an event that the agency does not have the capacity at the time, and therefore that creates another or escalates the event. So we want persons to pay heed to those recommendations and try to have them implemented. If they are having challenges having those recommendations implemented, consult. So there needs to be that relationship with the agencies.
And for you, Captain Harewood, what would you say?
Okay, so for the most part, the venues that are used for major mascot events, level 1 events, have been used regularly in the past. So most, if not all of them, already have generic plans, generic mascot plans, or venue plans. For example, the Kensington Oval, Gymnasium, Fardale has a plan, National Stadium, the old National Stadium, Oyston's Beer Garden, Bushy Park, Botanical Gardens, the Lara Court, they all have generic plans. So if you're going to have an event at any one of those locations, and there are others as well, one should first of all seek to get an idea of what the generic plan says and try to fit your event into the plan. We will also assist you in drafting those plans as well if the site that you're using doesn't have a plan. And then some of the things that we would want the agencies to pay particular attention to in their planning and understanding what is required would be things like the general layout of the facilities, where things are, where you're going to place things, where you're going to place the stage in association with where the entrances and exits are, where patrons are going to be, where the food court is going to be, for example, and easy access, ingress and egress from the event. If persons had to evacuate a particular area, where they're going to form up, etc. So all these things we need to look at, event coordinators need to look at to ensure that once the patrons are in there, they are safe. You can enjoy the event as safely as possible. You don't have to worry about anything else. And if something does happen, then that the organizers have their best interests at heart and they know exactly where to send them, etc. So some of the things like giving safety briefs before an event. I know you go to a party, you go to a fete, you go to one of these events, you don't want to hear a safety brief before it starts. Right? Because if you start a safety brief, then you start thinking, well, am I really safe? Yeah. But irrespective of that, then the organizers themselves need to know what the safety brief is. So if something does happen, the MC or whatever can come and say, ladies and gents, wherever, evacuate to your left, move this way or move that way or whatever. So they themselves need to know, even if you don't let the entire audience know that, just because of the type of event you have, you don't want to panic persons or whatever. But the MC at least should know what the safety plan says and where people should evacuate to.
Keeping the MC as abreast of all of the safety information, and then he can
or the DJ,
and he can disseminate it, however, throughout the event, etc. Yeah, that's a very good point. And also, so another thing that I'm thinking too is maybe the necessary investment of security and safety beforehand, as you are planning for all the bells and whistles of the event. You also must include, when you're thinking about putting down the funds for also the security and safety.
Yes, you're correct. And that's extremely important because oftentimes we hear people talk about security White House style. So which means that you are bringing people into the venue and you're making the venue so secure that getting out might be a challenge as well. But we also have to, and sometimes a lot of money is spent on the security of the event. We are saying that one needs to consider the safety of the event as well, and maybe budget, putting one of those your budget columns for safety. Even if I don't know if it's possible to actually find a sponsor just to sponsor the event safety protocol.
And just for us to understand, can you differentiate between security and safety?
Well, security is just dealing with the security matters. Keeping people that are supposed to be out, people that are in. making sure that only patrons are in, etc. Those are the security, and making sure that those people that would want to do ill to an event are managed easily, or can be identified and treated, etc. Now, the safety of the event now is what Marlon was speaking about earlier. The constant checks, safety checks, for extinguishers, poles. Sometimes some of these events would install temporary electrical connections. They have to be checked as well to make sure they're done correctly, and all these type of things. And constantly monitoring the crowd, because, for example, when the reasons that we have so many volunteers at some of these major events is that they monitor the crowd, and they can give a good indication to the VOC commander, venue operations center commander, that we have a lot of people moving towards maybe one side, and that could be a telltale sign that may need to be investigated, or maybe there's a spread in a particular part of the crowd that needs to be investigated. So they give early warning to a lot of these things.
So there's kind of there's an imbalance of the investment of security as opposed to safety. It needs to be a bit more of a balance there.
I would suggest that.
Yeah.
I would suggest
best practice.
Best
Best practice.
practice.
If you think
Yes,
about
let's say that
both.
best practice.
Yes.
So I don't put myself in trouble.
Yeah.
Let that be the best practice.
Yeah, best practice for security and safety. Yeah, and that discernment and the way that you define those two things, I think that's a very clear.
And they go hand in glove. They go hand in glove.
Right.
If you have a safety issue, if you have a security issue, it becomes a safety issue at the end. Because if the event ends up in fights or riots or whatever, then there is the knock-on effect to things like mass crowd, mass casualty situations, multiple casualties, etc. And this is where the fire and medical and stuff will have to do an intervention to save lives, etc., to move people to triage and those types of things.
Right. Okay.
So they go hand in glove.
And just so we have a full understanding of the mass crowd plan, I know there's a checklist. Can you give us some details on the checklist?
Sure. So the checklist includes those things that the mass crowd coordinator need to pay attention to, as well as the response agencies. So for the coordinator, they need to look at things like liability insurance, solid waste management infrastructure, electrical certification, public health certification for food handlers, liquor license, permission for fireworks if they can be using pyrotechnics, traffic management plan, the security plan, the venue emergency plan, the site plan, medical support, that medical plan. And then for the response agencies, we're looking at things like routes of ingress and egress, form-up areas, triage areas. Those form-up areas need to be at least 2. Triage areas, again, need to be at least 2. Evacuation routes, location and identification of hazards, the first aid or the medical area, the site command where the venue operations center would be located, and which will be outside of the larger crowd environment, and parking for emergency vehicles. So those are some of the basic things that the plan requires or asks us to ensure that are in place.
As we come to a close, I want for us to just have a quick wrap up from the both of you, and this would basically be about the importance of a mass crowd plan, right, and making sure that you do all of the necessary checks and balances. But before we get to that, I just want to say, first of all, Mr. Small, as well as Captain Harewood, we don't think about the invisible agencies, that make these things possible. Because we think, oh, this is how things are supposed to go. So, we're happy, right? But we don't see all of the little, And I just want to say thank you for all the people that are listening right now, including myself. Thank you for keeping all of us safe and secure. And I know that you will be doing that into the future. So as we wrap up, I just want to get some final words, first of all, from Mr. Small.
Yes, from the fire service perspective, if you are planning to have an event, get the fire service on board early so we can advise you as to what are those things that you need to have and put in place. And remember, we are not here to stop events, but we are here to ensure they're as safe as possible, ensuring that the best practices are always the first measures put in place. And we encourage everybody for the rest of the season to be safe and to work with us as we go about to ensure all these shows come off.
Right. Thanks. So if you're planning a mascot event, even if you don't call it a mascot event, we will want you to first of all communicate with the Barbados Police Service or the DM to indicate that this is what we're planning to do. And we will guide you from there. We will indicate to you whether what types of services you may need, and you should also always, I should say, pay special attention to the resources at an event and where you're having your event, because some of the events that we've noted of late are in venues which do not really lend to good mass crowd planning or good emergency planning, because the events, the locations themselves are starting with some significant vulnerabilities. So pay attention to where you want to hold your event and indicate early to the Barbados Police Service or to the DM that this is your intent, and we will guide you from there.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time, and thank you for your efforts. And that is also, again, on behalf of all the persons that are watching right now. That was another episode of Real Talk in the Face of Danger. For more information on the Department of Emergency Management and everything that the other agencies do, you can follow us on YouTube, on social media, and also you can check out our website. Thank you very much. My name is Marcus Myers, and stay tuned for more episodes.